GrimGrimoire has a memorable name, nice art, an intriguing premise, and questionable execution. At first glance, it's vanillaware StarCraft, complete with worker elves ferrying resources from a crystal, static defense cannons, a unit supply cap, and even a spell called Psychic Storm that does exactly what you'd expect. There's no doubt that Japan have been a superpower when it comes to game development, but whatever cultural factors might explain their dominance in this industry also seem to backfire from time to time. Despite its appealing visual design and unique take on the genre, GrimGrimoire fails to answer the obvious question of why I would ever want to play a game like this with a controller. Maybe the answer seems a little more obvious in a country where living space is at a higher premium, and thus consoles are far more prevalent than PCs. If I was a salaryman, GrimGrimoire might be more appealing to me, but outside that bubble it suffers critical damage from its control scheme. To be fair, some allowances have been made for those subpar controls. Time can be paused at will, meaning that any awkward moments where the camera needs to crawl from one side of the map to the other can at least be offset in-game, although you'll still be wasting time in real life, which is hopefully more valuable. Once I moved beyond the surface level impression, I came to see that this ability to pause at any moment affords players a technically perfect level of control. So-called real-time with pause rules out multiplayer and probably only emerged as a side effect of the controller, but there's something to be said in its favour. Spellcasters like the Homunculus and Grimalkin would easily fall to the wayside for all but the most skilled players if everything had to be commanded in real time. As it is now, they can become a vital part of army composition for everybody. The campaign seems to hammer this point home early with a mission where by far the best course of action is to cast sleep on an incoming enemy dragon. Again, you'll have to spend real-life time to pull off all this micromanagement, but it can be done, and I can just about imagine some younger version of myself willfully giving up that time to see how many missions I could complete without losing a single unit. In theory, there's something on offer here, although in practice, I'm still skeptical about how many will be willing to grasp it thanks to its unfortunate dependence on a controller. The more immediately obvious selling point is the numerous small twists it applies to preconceived notions of the genre. For example, rather than a traditional top-down view, battles take place from a side view in an enormous tower where most units are reliant on staircases to move up or down. This unique perspective is perhaps underutilized since there's no real difference between being above or below an opponent, but it inherently covers every map in an abundance of choke points, which is at least different if nothing else. Likewise, there's no tech tree to speak of. Instead, each mission starts the player with a handful of units and runes from a certain branch of magic, encouraging them to invest in those runes to at least some extent. While a simple type advantage system is in play, both the player and the opponent can freely mix and match those types together. In another strange inversion of what you might anticipate, sometimes the ideal counter to a given unit comes from its own type, like the aforementioned Grimalkin weakness present with dragons, or skull mages who deal huge damage to phantoms. Maybe these oddities don't necessarily increase the strategic depth, but they mess with whatever innate sense you have about how these games are supposed to work, throwing every strategy into question, which is refreshing and plays right into the tactical thinking appeal of the genre. Different isn't necessarily better, but change can bring about refinement, and I'm pretty sure this explains one of my favourite little mechanics. Each stage usually begins with a simple base already set up, but when it comes time to expand to a new crystal, players can choose which of the 4 harvester types they'd prefer to use. In order for this decision to carry any weight, there had to be some meaningful difference between them, which is why each worker has a secondary function. Not only is there a decision to be made about which of those abilities you'd prefer, but it also introduces an ongoing choice of whether you want to pull them off mining to perform that function. It's a small but genuine improvement over many other entries in the genre where workers tend to be simplistic to a fault. Outside of some changes and a few refinements, however, there are still plenty of traditional problems to be found, most notably an absence of rally points, which turns reinforcement into a tedious exercise of grabbing each unit once it's produced. Likewise, given how cumbersome it can be to move the camera back and forth all the time, it would have been nice if purchasing units was done in a Command & Conquer style gradual payment rather than the bulk cost you find with StarCraft, which prohibits queuing units unless the resources are already available. Yes, that rewards good micro, but since micro is essentially free in this game, I don't think that was the right approach. Another particularly frustrating oversight is the lack of overkill protection, meaning many attempts to focus fire end up wasting large amounts of damage. A handful of improvements along these lines would have gone a long way, but for the most part GrimGrimoire just feels like a victim of circumstance. As of this video, Vanillaware have yet to make the leap to PC releases, but it would be an even more obvious choice for this game than it already was back in 2007. Throw in a few Leaf Thracier style improvements along with a better control scheme and it might get upgraded from cult to niche. As it is now, it's valuable more as a curiosity than a game. At best, it might be thought-provoking by showing just how many things can be taken for granted within a given genre, but unfortunately it struggles against its handicap, failing to weave a compelling enough whole to be worth the hassle. In a sense, I'm glad to have played it, but until I see a revised edition, I'm probably leaving this Grimoire on the shelf.